All right, guys, good morning. So, everybody has, Kevin and Leah went to see Mr. Archie, who actually knew Stargirl, and we learned all the different names that she's been called. They were waiting for her to come back from the football game. She didn't, and then they asked her, she became a cheerleader. So, let's see what happens in the adventures here. The change began around Thanksgiving. By December 1st, Stargirl Caraway had become the most popular person in school. How did it happen? Was it the cheerleading? The last football game of the season was her first as a cheerleader. The grandstand was packed. Students, parents, alumni. Never had so many people come to a football game to see a cheerleader. She did all the regular cheers and routines, and more. In fact, she never stopped cheering. While the other girls were taking breaks, she went on jumping and yelling. She roamed areas that had always been ignored. The far ends of the grandstand, the spectators behind the goalpost, the snack bar parents found themselves with their own arm-pumping cheerleader. She ran straight across the 50-yard line and joined the other team's cheerleaders. We laughed as they stood there with their mouths open. She cheered in front of the players' bench and was shooed away by a coach. At halftime, she played her ukulele with the band. In the second half, she got acrobatic. She did cartwheels and backflips. At one point, the game was stopped and 3 zebra-shirted officials ran toward one end zone. She had shinnied up a goalpost, tightrope walked out to the middle of the crossbar, and was now standing there with her arms raised in a touchdown sign. She was commanded down to a standing ovation and flashing cameras. As we filed out afterward, no one mentioned how boring the game itself had been. No one cared that the Electrons had lost again. In his column next day, the sports editor of the Micah Times referred to her as the best athlete on the field. We couldn't wait for basketball season. Was it a Hillary Kimball backlash? Several days after the birthday song, I heard a shout down the hallway. Don't! I ran. A crowd was gathered at the top of the stairwell. They were all staring at something. I pushed my way through. Hillary Kimball was standing at the upper landing, grinning. She was holding Cinnamon, the rat, dangling by its tail over the railing. Nothing but space between it and the first floor. Stargirl was on the steps below, looking up. The scene froze. The bell for the next class rang. Nobody moved. Stargirl said nothing, merely looked. The 8 toes of Cinnamon's front paws splayed apart. Its tiny, unblinking eyes were bulging, black as cloves. Again a voice rang out. Don't, Hillary! Suddenly Hillary dropped it. Someone screamed, but the rat fell only to the floor at Hillary's feet. She sent Stargirl a final sneer and left. Was it Dory Dilson? Dory Dilson was a brown-haired 9th grader who wrote poems in a loose-leaf notebook half as big as herself, and whose name nobody knew until the day she sat down at Stargirl's table for lunch. Next day, the table was full. No longer did Stargirl eat lunch or walk the hallways or do anything else at school alone. Was it us? Did we change? Why didn't Hillary Kimball drop the rat to its death? Did she see something in our eyes? Whatever the reason, by the time we returned from Thanksgiving break, it was clear that the change had occurred. Suddenly, Stargirl was not dangerous, and we rushed to embrace her. Calls of Stargirl flew down the hallways. We couldn't say her name often enough. It tickled us to mention her name to strangers and watch the expressions on their faces. Girls liked her, boys liked her, and, most remarkable, the attention came from all kinds of kids. Shy mice and princesses, jocks and eggheads. We honored her by imitation. A chorus of ukuleles strummed in the lunchroom. Flowers appeared on classroom desks. One day it rained and a dozen girls ran outside to dance. The pet shop at the Micah Mall ran out of rats. The best chance for us to express our admiration came the first week of December. We gathered in the auditorium for the annual oratorical contest, sponsored by the Arizona League of Women Voters. The event was open to any high school student who cared to show his or her stuff as a public speaker. The microphone was yours for 7 minutes. Talk about anything you like. The winner would move on to district competitions. Usually only 4 or 5 students enter the contest at MAHS. That year were 13, including Stargirl. You didn't have to be a judge to see that she was far and away the best. She gave an animated speech, a performance really, titled Elf Owl, Call Me by My First Name. Her gray-brown homesteader's dress was the color of her subject. I couldn't see her freckles from the audience, but I imagined them dancing on her nose as she flicked her head this way and that. When she finished, we stomped the floor and whistled and shouted for more. While the judges went through the charade of conferring, a film was shown. It was a brief documentary about the previous year's state finals. It featured the winner, a boy from Yuma. The most riveting moments of the film came not during the contest, but during its aftermath. When the boy arrived back at Yuma High, the whole school mobbed him in the parking lot. Banners, cheerleaders, band music, confetti, streamers. Pumping his arms in the air, the returning hero rode their shoulders into school. The film ended. The lights went on, and the judges proclaimed Stargirl the winner. She would now go to the district competition in Red Rock, they said. The state finals would be held in Phoenix in April. Again and again we whooped and whistled. Such was the acclamation we gave her in those last weeks of the year, but we also gave something to ourselves. Chapter 9. In the Sonoran Desert, there were ponds. You could be standing in the middle of one and not know it, because the ponds are usually dry. Nor would you know that inches below your feet frogs are sleeping, their heartbeats down to once or twice per minute. They lie dormant and waiting, these mud frogs, for without water their lives are incomplete. They are not fully themselves. For many months they sleep like this within the earth, and then the rain comes and 100 pairs of eyes pop out of the mud, and at night 100 voices call across the moonlit water. It was wonderful to see, wonderful to be in the middle of. We mud frogs awakening all around. We were awash in tiny attentions, small gestures, words, empathies, thought to be extinct came to life. For years, the strangers among us had passed sullenly in the hallways. Now we looked, we nodded, we smiled. If someone got an A, others celebrated too. If someone sprained an ankle, others felt the pain. We discovered the color of each other's eyes. It was a rebellion she led, a rebellion for rather than against, for ourselves, for the dormant mud frogs we had been for so long. Kids whose voices had never been heard before spoke up in class. Letters to the editor filled the whole page of the school newspaper's December edition. More than 100 students tried out for the spring review. One kid started a camera club. Another wore hush puppies instead of sneakers. A plain, timid girl painted her toenails Kelly green. A boy showed up with purple hair. None of this was publicly acknowledged. There were no PA announcements, no TV coverage, no headlines in the Micah Times. MAHS students astir, individuality erupts. But it was there. It was happening. I was used to peering through the lens, to framing the picture, and I could see it. I could feel it in myself. I felt lighter, unshackled, as if something I had been carrying had fallen away. But I didn't know what to do about it. There was no direction to my liberation. I had no urge to color my hair or trash my sneakers, so I just enjoyed the feeling and watched the once amorphous student body separate itself into hundreds of individuals. The pronoun we itself seemed to crack and drift apart in pieces. Ironically, as we discovered and distinguished ourselves, a new collective came into being. A vitality, a presence, a spirit that had not been there before. It echoed from the rafters in the gym. Go Electrons! It sparkled in the water fountains. At the holiday assembly, the words of the alma mater had wings. It's a miracle, I gushed to Archie one day. He stood on the edge of his back porch. He did not turn. He pulled the pipe slowly from between his lips. He spoke as if Senor Saguaro, or to the blazing mountains beyond. Best hope it's not, he said. The trouble with miracles is they don't last. And the trouble with bad times is you can't sleep through them. It was a golden age, those few weeks in December and January. How could I know that when the end came, I would be in the middle of it? Chapter 10. All my resistance to putting Stargirl on hot seat vanished. Okay, I said to Kevin, let's do it. Schedule her. And he started off. I grabbed his arm. Wait, ask her first. He laughed. Right, like she's going to say no. No one had ever said no to the hot seat. Any reluctance to answering personal or embarrassing questions always yielded to the lure of appearing on TV. If anyone could resist that lure, I figured it would be Stargirl. That day, after school, Kevin came and me thumbs up grinning. It's a go. She said yes. First, I was surprised. This didn't fit my impression of her. I didn't know that this was an early glimpse of something I was soon to see much more of. Behind the dazzling talents and differentness, she was far more normal than I had realized. Then I was elated. We yipped, we high-fived, we saw visions of our most popular show ever. This was mid-January. We set a date of February 13th, the day before Valentine's. We wanted a full month for build-up. With my resistance now gone, I jumped in with both feet. We planned a promo campaign. We got art students to do posters. We jotted down questions for Kevin to ask in case the jury ran out. Fat chance of that happening. We didn't have to post the usual jury notice. Dozens of kids volunteered. And then things changed again. In the courtyard of our school stood a 5-foot sheet of plywood in the shape of a roadrunner. It was a bulletin board strictly for student use, always taped and tacked with messages and announcements. One day we found the following computer printout taped to the plywood roadrunner. I pledge allegiance to United Turtles of America and to the fruit bats of Borneo, one planet in the Milky Way, incredible with justice and black bean burritos for all. Handwritten across the bottom were the words, "This is how she says the Pledge of Allegiance." No one had to tell us who she was. Apparently, she was overheard in the homeroom as we said the pledge each morning. As far as I knew, we were not a particularly patriotic bunch. I didn't hear people saying they were offended. Some thought it was funny. Some giggled and nodded knowingly as if to say, there she goes again. On the following mornings, more than one kid was heard reciting the new pledge. Within days, a new story wildfired through the student body. A senior girl, Anna Grisdale, lost her grandfather after a long illness. The funeral took place on a Saturday morning, and for a while everything seemed routine. The crowd of people at the church, the line of cars with their headlights on, the smaller group clustered around the grave for a final farewell. After the brief graveside service, the funeral director handed everyone a long-stemmed flower. Upon leaving, each mourner laid his or her flower over the casket. That was when Anna Grisdale first noticed Stargirl. Through her own tears, Anna could see Stargirl was crying also. She wondered if Stargirl had been at the church as well. Even more, she wondered why Stargirl was there at all. Could she have been friends with her grandfather without Anna's knowing it? Anna's mother asked her who the unfamiliar girl was. Afterwards, the mourners were invited to Anna's house for lunch. About 30 came. There was a buffet of cold cuts and salads and cookies. Stargirl was there, chatting with members of the family, but not eating or drinking anything. Suddenly, Anna heard her mother's voice. It was no louder than the others, but it was different. "What are you doing here?" Sudden stillness. Everyone staring. They were in front of the picture window. Anna had never seen her mother so angry. Miss Grisdale had been very close to her father. They had built an addition to their house so he could live with them. She glared down at Stargirl. "Answer me." Stargirl gave no reply. "You didn't even know him, did you?" Stargirl said nothing. "Did you?" And then Anna's mother was flinging open the front door and pointing as if banishing her to the desert. "Leave my house." Stargirl left. Danny Pike was 9 years old. He loved to ride the bicycle he had gotten for his birthday. One day after school, he lost control and plowed into a mailbox. He broke his leg, but that wasn't the worst of it. A blood clot developed, and he was airlifted to Children's Hospital in Phoenix, where he was operated on. For a while, it was touch and go, but within a week, he was on his way back home. All this was reported in the Micah Times, as was the celebration when Danny arrived at his home in Pinion Lake. The 5-column photo in the Times showed Danny on his father's shoulder, surrounded by a mob of neighbors. In the foreground was a new bike with a big sign that read, "Welcome Home, Danny." It wasn't until days later that the front page photo appeared on the plywood Roadrunner. We gathered around to see something we hadn't noticed before. An arrow from a thick felt red tip marker pointed at one of the tiny faces crowded into the frame. It was the face of a girl beaming as if Danny Pike was her little brother from the dead. It was Stargirl. And then there was the bike. The various members of the Pike family, parents, grandparents, and others, each thought someone else had bought Danny the new bike. Several days went by before they discovered, to their great surprise, that none of them had. So where did the bike come from? High schoolers who heard the story and saw the picture had a pretty good idea. Apparently the Pikes did not. The bike became the focus of a family squabble. Mr. Pike was mad because nobody he asked would admit to buying the bike, and probably because he hadn't done it himself. Miss Pike was mad because no way, not for at least 1 year, would she allow Danny back on wheels. One night, the new, still unridden bike wound up in the Pikes' front curb with the trash cans. By the time the trash collector came the next day, it was gone. Danny got a BB gun instead. The Pledge of Allegiance, the Grisdale funeral, the Danny Pike affair, these things were noted, but they had no immediate impact on Stargirl's popularity at school. Not so with cheerleading in the boys' basketball season.